Today I was meeting a client face-to-face here who is from a country that has a pretty terrible passport. He can only really go visa-free to around 20 countries around the world. He is currently in a country that will most likely not give him citizenship, or if he does get citizenship, it will take him more than 8 years to get it. The residency that he has is pretty helpful for traveling to other countries. His residency is in Schengen, and if you have a Schengen residency, you can go to places like Mexico, for example, or other countries in Latin America, or sometimes you can go to countries in non-EU Eastern Europe just because you have the Schengen permit. But he was asking, I want to have other passports. This country that I'm in right now will probably not naturalize me, and the naturalization requirements are huge. Where do I go? And that's what inspired this video. Advice for people with terrible passports. Now, what I recommend you is if you're in a rush to travel somewhere, if you're in a rush to be recognized differently, if you're in a rush to open a bank account somewhere, if you have a terrible passport, we're talking a Nigerian, an Indian, a Pakistani, a Syrian, something that you can't really go anywhere. Applying for a visa is a terrible process. Overall, it's going to be a huge headache. My recommendation is still the Caribbean. You get that Schengen access. In some cases, you get that UK access. You just get a better passport. You are still born in Nigeria, for example, or India, or any of these countries, so you're still going to be recognized as a person from that country, but with a better passport. Now you can start traveling to better countries. And I would argue, if you look African, if you're from Africa, with a Caribbean passport, some people will think that you're from the Caribbean, because the idea of some people of the Caribbean is people that look like people from Africa. So actually, in a visual sense, when an immigration officer is looking at your passport, when an immigration officer is looking at you, or in general, the perception of people where you're going or in other countries is going to be pretty favorable. So there's a famous Nigerian YouTuber who got St. Kitts citizenship, and he says it's very easy to travel with the passport. People even think he's from St. Kitts. So I would actually advise to get one of these Caribbean passports to improve your travel. It's going to take you a while. It's not going to take you 45 days. It's not going to take you 60 days. It's going to take you minimum 6 months, in some cases 8 months. But it's the fast track to just improving your travel mobility around the world. Now, if you want to add on something on top, which my client wants, he wants a top-tier passport, an EU citizenship, something that allows him to live in multiple countries, something that allows him to travel to pretty much anywhere he wants. He has a giant business that has been running for over 100 years in his family, and he wants to be able to just go anywhere at any time to meet a client. He wants to go to the US, to Australia. So what I advise him to do is to do the Portugal Golden Visa. The Portugal Golden Visa is very helpful because you don't actually need to live in Portugal. This particular client has to live in the Schengen country for business reasons at least 6 months a year. And if he's living here 6 months a year, he can naturalize in this country, but it's going to take him way too long. He's going to have to learn a very complicated language. So overall, it's not going to work that well. He can, in the meantime, naturalize in Portugal while just spending 2 to 3 weeks per year in Portugal. He can invest in a fund, 500,000 euros, wait for the Golden Visa to be issued around 1 year. He already has a Schengen residency, so he doesn't need it right now. That's why I advise you, get a Caribbean passport, and that Caribbean passport gives you that Schengen access, and then apply for the Portuguese Golden Visa under your new Caribbean passport. It's also going to be faster processing if you apply with a Caribbean passport as opposed to a Pakistani passport. Pakistanis around the world, fortunately, are viewed in a bad way. So it's going to be much better to apply with a Caribbean passport, even though you're still Pakistani, your name is Pakistani, and so on. You wait for a Golden Visa to be processed. That actually starts the naturalization clock. And if you are from a country with a terrible passport, just know that these European countries, these countries that you want to get citizenship in, it will be harder for you to naturalize than it would be for an American. So don't expect, oh, I'm going to be naturalized in 5 years without doing anything. No, you actually have to build ties to that country. So on top of spending 2 to 3 weeks per year, I would advise get property in Portugal, get banking in Portugal, have your ties to Portugal, even if you're living in another country, to potentially naturalize after 5 years and get that EU citizenship. You also get the Golden Visa. So if St. Kitts or any Caribbean citizenship loses that Schengen access, then you maintain it with the Golden Visa in Portugal. If you're from a country with a terrible passport, then unfortunately you can't use, for example, the Spanish residency to obtain citizenship in 2 years, unless we're talking about Dominican Republic or one of these countries that has a bad passport, but also a good connection to Spain. So you essentially want to use the fastest route for citizenship specifically, which is Portugal in this case. If you're a highly specialized individual, then you want to go to Cyprus, but also they might not even naturalize you because they don't like your original nationality. So in this case, Portugal actually works out pretty well. On top of that, if you want even more diversification, this client has Schengen residency, wants to get Portuguese Golden Visa, is also considering doing a Caribbean passport. He's also considering doing Turkish citizenship. He's not that fond of it just because it's a Muslim country. His religion doesn't really get along with Muslims, which up to you. If you're a Muslim, you might like Turkey. but I do advise it for some clients that want to have extra diversification while investing into real estate. But it does take a while. It takes around 1 year, sometimes 1.5 years to get Turkish citizenship, and it's not that easy as it was before. They require a lot of documents. Sometimes they check the documents twice, criminal record, absolutely everything they require to have Turkish citizenship. It's not as before, where you bought the property, 3 months later you have your passport, and it's a done deal. It doesn't work like that anymore, unfortunately. On top of all of this, he was asking me about citizenship by exception, non-EU Eastern Europe, Latin America, European Union, citizenship by exception. And unfortunately, for people with pretty terrible passports, it's almost always going to be a rejection off the bat for any type of citizenship by exception. Let's say you apply for citizenship by exception in any country like the Republic of Georgia, and you start a business in Georgia, you employ a bunch of people, you invest in the country and so on. Unless you're very well connected or you have a proper agent on the ground, you're not really going to be naturalized as a citizen by exception unless you learn the language, unless you spend there the required amount of time, because they don't want to naturalize people like you. They don't want to naturalize people from your country. It's sad, it's terrible, but in some countries, they work like that. If they see a person applying with a worse nationality, they're not going to naturalize you. They're going to even tell you from the beginning, no, we don't want people from your country. We don't want people that look like you. In some cases, because you might have a Canadian passport, let's say, but you were born in India. For them, you're technically Indian, even though you're Canadian, because on the birth certificate, it's Indian, and you also look Indian, and your name is Indian. So they just don't want Indians in general, that specific ethnicity or nationality or origin, they don't want it. So don't be afraid of that. Don't think, oh, this person is racist, this country is terrible. It's just the way that they operate. They don't want their reputation to be damaged by somebody that could potentially cause some trouble in that sense. So getting that Portuguese golden visa, St. Kitts or Caribbean citizenship if you need it, Turkish citizenship if you need it, some sort of Latin American residency would also be really helpful. I know a lot of people with terrible passports that are getting Mexican residency. Could be helpful. You could get a Schengen visa, or you could get a Portuguese golden visa and then fly visa free to Mexico and they get residency in Mexico, just an extra country. You could also give birth in one of these countries. You could give birth in Mexico, and in Mexico, it's pretty straightforward. They're a little bit racist when it comes to giving citizenship, but if you give birth in Mexico or your wife, girlfriend gives birth there, you're going to get that citizenship in 2 years. Your child's going to get it immediately. So if you're a family from India or from any other terrible passport country and you fly to Mexico, you give birth in Mexico, the child's going to be Mexican. Even if they are originally Indian, even if they look Indian, they were born in Mexico, therefore they are a Mexican citizen. And this is extremely helpful for anyone with a terrible passport because, for example, in the case of Argentina, you can naturalize very, very quickly. Case of Brazil, you naturalize after 1 year. Case of Mexico, you naturalize after 2 years. You get yourself a solid passport. After 2 years, you give your child an immediate solid second passport, whereas with the other passport, they would struggle a lot. And you also give your child the opportunity to get Spanish citizenship later on. So you're essentially covering all their bases, as many as possible. And that's essentially what I recommend. If you have a terrible passport, follow these steps and let me know in the comments. If you want to get a second citizenship and you want to know the fastest countries around the world to become a citizen, check out this video right here. And also I explain the hardest countries, the ones that I don't recommend. People promote them as the best countries to get naturalized and they suck. Check them out right here so you learn everything.